It's about having the conviction to take these guys into court and to hold them accountable and not backing down because of the pressure. But you know, they can be very powerful politically, but I know that they can be taken on, and I know we can win. And as president, I will win.
Thank you, Senator Harris, for sitting down with me. I'm Rebecca Lieber with Mother Jones. And my first question is, you were one of the first candidates right out the gate to endorse a Green New Deal.
Yeah.
But since then, we've seen the Green New Deal take on a lot of different meanings for different people.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could tell our viewers what a Green New Deal means.
A Green New Deal means that we approach the climate crisis with a sense of urgency, and that we have in place specific timelines that are ambitious and achievable, meaning some might call it ambitious, but I know it's achievable. And that we think about the repair that we can do, the mitigation that we can do around harm, in a way that understands that this is going to be about not only saving our planet, but it's going to be about growing our economy. It will be about empowering all too long ignored communities, and it will be about holding the polluters accountable. And so that's what a Green New Deal, and that's what my Green New Deal means, which is really, those are the three pillars, frankly. It's about, with an emphasis, frankly, on what we need to do around holding the polluters accountable, because I think for too long they've gotten away with profiting in huge amounts, in huge dollars, in creating a harm that they knew was a harm that they were creating.
All the Democratic candidates say climate change is a priority, but there's also the question of what gets top priority in an administration. What would you tell voters who might have some concerns that climate change, where climate change stands in your priority list?
It's one of my highest priorities, and you can look at my record to know that's the case. When I was elected District Attorney of San Francisco back in 2003, I created an environmental justice unit and took on polluters because for me, it is a crime against the community, it is a crime against our environment. When I was Attorney General of California, I took on the polluters and won, took on big oil companies. People said, oh, they're so powerful and politically powerful, you're going to hurt your career. And I didn't care, and we won, and I'm still standing. And so as president, this is going to be one of my highest priorities. Also because, look, I was born in California, and I was raised in a state that, like many others, understood that when leaders lead, we can actually do something about it. I often talk about Los Angeles as an example, where the sky was brown, and there were high rates of asthma among children, and low and slow lung development. Weather forecasters would say, don't go out today, it's not safe for children or seniors. And everybody got fed up and said it's time for leaders to lead. And so we put in place laws and rules that were around reducing greenhouse gas emissions with specific timelines. We put in place rules around the quality of our air as it relates to the oil companies. We put in place rules that were about creating incentives for electric vehicles. And we also created incentives for jobs and industry to grow up around things like installation and maintenance of wind turbines and solar paneling. We right now in California have a growing and thriving industry that we're manufacturing within the United States, electric school buses, which, by the way, that's part of my Green New Deal, that by 2035, all school buses will be electric. Why? Well, because 25 million kids a year go to school on a school bus, and they are inhaling fumes that are toxic. So, listen, I come from a background of not only working on this issue and knowing what is possible, but I come from a place where I know that when we lead, we actually can see results, and within a relatively short period of time. And maybe that's the source of my enthusiasm about this, and also my optimism, but also my deep conviction that if we do nothing within the next 12 years, it will be irreparable, the harm. And it's not only that we do nothing, we need to do a lot, and we can. It's achievable.
I wanted to ask you more about your record investigating and suing some major fossil fuel companies.
Yeah.
I wonder what about that experience you would take to the presidency and what the role of the federal government would be in investigating those companies.
So that's a great question. My experience is that they have very powerful lobbyists and lawyers, and they have a whole apparatus that is built around them because they profit in an extraordinary way off of their behaviors. So there's a lot of money on the line for them. I've seen it both when I took them on as Attorney General, but also I've seen it now that I've been in the U.S. Senate for 2 years, and the strength with which those lobbyists walk around Capitol Hill. So they're powerful, but we're more powerful, and there's more power in the people. And it's about taking the case to the streets and reminding people that they don't have to live with these kinds of the behaviors taking place that are harming their communities. And then it's about having the conviction to take these guys into court and to hold them accountable and not backing down because of the pressure. But you know, they can be very powerful politically, but I know that they can be taken on, and I know we can win. And as president, I will win.
Do you think the federal government should play a role in those investigations?
Absolutely, through the Department of Justice in particular. I was, as Attorney General of California, I ran the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, second only to the United States Department of Justice. And when you talk about the power of the prosecutor, I have always felt strongly that the role should be to go after, not going after, people on the streets and creating and criminalizing public health issues like drugs. It should be about going after, these powerful interests that are creating incredible harm in our communities and without consequence creating that harm. And let's get them not only in the pocketbook, but let's make sure that there are severe and serious penalties for their behaviors. So part of my approach in terms of my Green New Deal and what I will do as president is to also shift the responsibility from families and from individuals to prove that they've been harmed. Because let's be clear about how that plays out. And I'll give you an example. When I was Attorney General, there's this small community in California called Mira Loma, a community of hardworking people, many of whom third-generation immigrant, a lot of whom are monolingual Spanish-speaking, and the grandparents and the grandmothers forever have been complaining about the pollution and about the fact that there was a finding that the children of that community had some of the slowest lung development of any in Southern California. And I'd been hearing about it, and then I went to go visit that community. And if you've ever been to a place where you could feel the taste of metal and where your eyes just water up because that's how polluted it is, that's what I found in Mira Loma. So I decided to put the full force of my office as Attorney General and the California Department of Justice into that issue to make sure that that community had a voice and that they were not fighting alone against these powerful interests. And that's how I think about this issue. Nobody should be made to fight alone. These families who are barely making it through the end of the month and also experiencing these awful health consequences, including places like New Hampshire with PFAS in the water. These families should not be made to fight alone. And so as president, that is a very important principle that I bring to this issue, and will make sure that the Department of Justice, make sure that the EPA, that we all have a role in making sure that these families will not have to fight alone, and that we're going to put the pressure on the big companies to do what is required and what is responsible.
I've heard you talk about using executive action to push forward on gun control
Yeah.
if you face a divided Congress, but you likely face the same situation for climate change. So how do you use the powers of the executive branch
Yeah.
on climate change, and how do you do that in a way that goes beyond the Obama administration record in reversing Trump's rollbacks and rejoining the Paris Climate Accords?
Well, on day one, I will re-enter the Paris Climate Accords and also the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. That's very important. But in addition to that, let's be clear that the President of the United States gets to appoint her cabinet. And for me, this issue of the climate crisis relates to every aspect of what we do, be it the Department of Labor and what we do around creating incentives for training of workers to get into the jobs that are part of a clean economy. And in particular, I have an intention to give workers who need to transition into new skills a tax credit of $8,000 to be able to do that. It relates to the Department of Education. I look forward to saying goodbye to Betsy DeVos. But in addition, it is about making sure that we are teaching our students about the significance of this and not pushing science fiction when they should be learning science fact around their power to actually create a better future. It relates to what we are doing in the Department of Health and Human Services. And that's both around public health policy that targets and focuses on the health consequences of this crisis, but also what we do in terms of mitigating against it, right? So every branch has a role and a responsibility, and I will convene and appoint a cabinet that each understands that it is their responsibility to think of their work through the lens of what they can do to mitigate against this crisis, but also to prevent anything like this from happening in the future.
I wanted to ask you about the situation with PG&E, the largest utility in California, and the recent blackouts for hundreds of thousands of its customers. I wondered if you see that this is how this might be an extension of climate change impacts, and also how PG&E, as a company that was involved in the early days 30 years ago in groups that pushed inaction on climate change, if that action from 30 years ago should mean PG&E should still be held accountable.
I think that everyone who was a part of misinforming the public, misleading the public, and false advertising should be held accountable. And there is, in my vision of the future, a very important role for utilities to play in being held accountable, in doing things like being transparent around what they have and have not been doing to mitigate against harm, to upgrade their systems, and to invest in what we can do around renewable energy. There's no question that there's a very important role, and it is something, again, that on the issue of PG&E and others, I have taken on in the past, and I will do as president.
Do you think those blackouts are an example of impacts from climate change?
I do, absolutely. And I think that, look, we can see there are so many issues that we are facing on a daily basis that are a result of the climate crisis. And when we look at the blackouts, remember, the blackouts aren't just happening. They're turning off the electricity because it will then it will then fuel a fire. So it's not like the blackout is just happening for climate crisis. It is an act of mitigation against the climate crisis, right? And so it's directly related.
My final question has to do with the nation's agriculture. And as a politician of a state that produces a lot of the nation's food supply, you've probably seen how climate change already affects farmers. As president, what would be your first step to ensuring a reliable food supply and preventing against climate change impacts?
So I'm really glad you asked that because we're here in Iowa. I come from a state, as you said, that has a huge agricultural industry and community. We're very proud of the fact that we produce, close to a majority of the fruits and vegetables consumed by the country. And I see a very important role for farmers in our future. You know, farmers by their very nature are innovative. They adapt to the climate as it is given to them, and they are resourceful, and they are smart in the way that they are creative and think about how we can actually adapt in a way that is supportive of our environment. And so things like cover crops, right? There's some interesting work happening here in Iowa and around the country where farmers are leading the way. Farmers are leading the way around what we can do around biofuels, right? So I'm really looking forward to having them in a role of leadership at the table around how we address this. And then, you know, the future of food that is a big part of it as well. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. When did climate change become a crisis for you?
When I was in elementary school.
Really?
Yeah, no, seriously. So I went to Thousand Oaks Elementary School in Berkeley, California. And we call them ecology projects. In fact, I'll never forget, I came home one day, I was an elementary school student, and I was like, Mommy, I don't understand. So we don't like conservatives, but we're conservationists. And I couldn't understand how to reconcile the two. But I mean, as early as I can remember priorities, it was about conservation. It was about respecting our environment, protecting our environment. It was about, you know, a full awareness about the significance of drought and the importance of recycling and the importance of understanding these precious natural resources and the need to preserve them and not take them for granted. I mean, literally since I was a child.